Next up is Lights Out. Now, this is another film with a great concept. Like, there's this ghost, and you can only see the ghost when the lights are off. And the film puts a lot of great situations where the lights are turning on and off, or there's flickering lights, and they just get all these great situations for a horror movie. So, it's a creative horror movie. I just don't find the characters that interesting. And again, it's just the characters and the writing and the dialogue. That's what like brings down the film. And again, there's some creative situations here with the ghosts who you can only see when the lights are turned off. But that only comes like once every 10 minutes. It's not like that's the entire film. And when it's not focusing on the ghost or the horror aspect of it, you're just left with some, very bad characters with some very hokey dialogue. So again, a film that I didn't enjoy as much as I hoped I would. Next up is The Fog. Now, again, I'm starting to see a trend here where there's these 80s movies that people say are great, like 80s horror movies, 80s action movies, and then I watch those films and I don't like it very much. And for The Fog, for anyone who has seen it, you probably know how slow this movie is. Like, I like slow burns. Andor is my favorite TV show of the year, and that was very slow compared to other shows I've seen this year. So, I'm okay with a slow burn, but when the plot is going very slow, you should be setting up characters and there should be something interesting. I didn't really find that. I didn't find the characters to be that interesting, and the characters who I did find interesting or played by very great actors aren't given as much screen time as they should. And the film is like in this loophole where they have all these characters and they have this whole town to explore and all these characters to explore and all these storylines, and they have 1 hour and 30 minutes to bring all that together. And through those 1 hour and 30 minutes, they don't do that much with the characters or the concept. It's just a very boring film, and the concept itself is pretty good. It's directed by a great director, the same guy who directed Halloween, so there are some jump scares in here. There's some scary moments. But you have like a great concept, like these ghosts who are in the fog and then the fog going to the town, and they make it boring. Like, how do they make these great concepts boring with Escape from New York and now this? Again, it's just expectations, and that's something you're gonna see a lot in this ranking, but me talk about a lot in this ranking. I have high or low expectations for something, and that affects my enjoyment of the film. So just keep that in mind. And next up is The Hitcher. Now, this is a very frustrating one because the actor who plays the villain of the film, the serial killer, the Hitcher, he's played by a very good actor, and he does a very good job as a villain, and the protagonist, whoever plays the protagonist, does a really good job. So, this time around, the characters are not the problem here, and it does have a nice premise. Like, there are some scary scenes. When you get to the opening scene, you're on the edge of your seat as it seems like this guy is about to kill the protagonist, and, he's like right next to him in his car, and of course he survives, and then survives for the rest of the film. So, there's some creepy scenes that get you on the edge of your seat, but it goes way too over the top. Like, it loses its realism, and it's also this weird film where it's in this letterbox format, letterbox ratio when I saw it, where, all sides of the film are total blackness, and then you just have to stare into the middle of the screen, and it's just like this small square on the screen, so that may have affected my enjoyment of it. But it just loses its realism. Like, there's this car chase scene where these two random people have better aim than the police. Like, the police have awful aim, like stormtrooper aim, and the two protagonists can easily shoot them and shoot their wheels like they're the Terminator. And does that make sense? Like, the police, the people with training, have worse aim than these two random people? And then there's like these very unrealistic scenes where the villain of the film is shooting down a helicopter with a pistol, and they just make it very unbelievable of how this guy is following the protagonist, and how he gets so lucky. I mean, it just loses realism. It has a great concept, but it's brought down by very dumb writing. It was promising for like the first third of the film, and then it just gets too stupid for me to follow along with it. Next is Death at a Funeral 2007 original British version. Technically, there's two Death at a Funerals. There's a 2007 version and 2010 version, and both of them is about this family who's celebrating a funeral, and it's a fine comedy movie. I don't find that funny. I find some parts of it funny. The cast in both of them do a very good job, and it has a lot of funny actors in them. And of course, there are some interesting situations here, like interesting situations that the characters have to overcome, and which lead to jokes, obviously. Like, this is mainly a comedy film, but it's also kind of entertaining. That scene where the main character is talking about how his father wasn't perfect and nobody's perfect, but either way, we can still respect them. That actually, like, touched me in the heart. Like, that was actually a very wholesome speech. But again, it's just a fine comedy movie. Like, most of the jokes, they don't work very well. And, there's some some storylines that are less interesting than others. So, it's a nice way to pass the time, and, it's a nice thing to watch on Netflix if you want to. But otherwise, it's just fine. It's a fine comedy movie. It has some good stuff on it about it, but it's not that funny, or at least as funny as it could have been. And next up is a reboot of Death at a Funeral, 2010, the 2010 version. I simply just put this version over the original because there are a couple of lines that weren't in the original that I actually liked a lot. And, it has some very likable actors. Like, it has more recognizable actors, so maybe I'm biased because of that, but, it was just fun to see all these actors who I grew up with just be in this one movie. So, same thing I said about the first film, just a little bit better. Next up is Morbius. Yeah, I mean, I had very low expectations going into it, like rock bottom expectations. I was hearing all these crazy things about how the sound quality was off, and how the sound was horrible, and how the effects were horrible, and all this stuff, which were unbelievable news, like how awful this film is. And I watch it and it's okay. I mean, there were some scenes that actually got me engaged. Like, I was engaged about this guy finding out that he has to drink blood every 6 hours, and he's a vampire now. And that scene where Morbius is learning about his powers, that stuff I actually liked a lot. And, the villain isn't good, and there are some scenes where a character says he's going to do something and then he doesn't do it. And, there's some plot holes in here, and, some bad jokes. And yeah, there's a lot of bad stuff, but it's entertaining. It is. It's fine. And, I mean, that's just because my expectations were so low. Like, my expectations were rock bottom. The only reason I was watching that film in theaters was so I could make fun of it on my YouTube channel. So I can make a video absolutely destroying it. That's the only reason I wanted to watch it. Then I watched it, and it's okay. It's okay. I mean, I do get it. There are some awful stuff about it, but overall, it's entertaining. The pace is fast, so it goes in a very fast pace. Seeing Dr. Morbius learn about his powers, that stuff was interesting, so it's not an awful film. I mean, I get why people say it's awful. I mean, I said that I didn't get it, but, I can kind of get why people say that this is awful. But at the same time, I just had such low expectations going into it. I heard all this awful stuff, and it wasn't that bad. And a lot of people like to forget about this or not talk about this. But if you go to Rotten Tomatoes, and this was the last time I saw it, like when the movie first came out, so I don't know if it's still like this. Maybe a little bit of a lower rating, but, on Rotten Tomatoes, if you go to the audience score is actually like 70%, 60%. That's actually not that bad. That's okay. Like, I think this movie's okay. A lot of people think this movie is okay. For whatever reason, people like to talk about the critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, where it's 17%, but the audience score is like 60, 70%. So, I don't know. I feel like some people just hate this movie because they had unreasonably high expectations going into it, or they just want to join the hate train, but for me, it's okay. It's not that bad. Next up is Night House. And this is a film where it seems like they're setting up to something bigger than they actually are, and then you get to the end of the film, and I'm left confused and a little bit frustrated. It's well directed, it's well cast, has some nice plot twists, but overall, it felt like they were leading to something more, and they just leave me with a bitter taste in my mouth. I left the film disappointed. Next up is Conjuring 3. Now, I like all three of the Conjuring films. I don't think there's a bad one. And even this film, I think is actually pretty good. It's fine. It's decent. It's fine. I mean, there's some things about the villain where you don't know what her powers are. Like, she gets hit in the head, but she can teleport, and you don't know if she's really a ghost or just like this person who is doing curses, or you don't know if you can hit her or not, if she can hurt you or not, if she's lucent. What I'm trying to say. So, there's some things about the villain which I didn't get, and for whatever reason, the film just has this weird filter where everything is like this yellow filter or orange filter, which makes the film look very ugly compared to the first two films. So, yeah, it's not that great of a film. It's definitely a step down from the first two, but it doesn't ruin my enjoyment of the first two. It's still a great film, and I still have faith in the fourth film to be really good. So, I have faith in the franchise. It wasn't bad. I don't think it's, the franchise is going downhill. It's just a little bit of a step down. And next up is Salem's Lot. Now, this is another frustrating one because the first 2/3 of this film I liked a lot, like how they talk about how how the town operates, and they just world build this town, and the people in the town, all that stuff they do with the setting of the film. I think they do a very good job with, and the characters themselves are pretty interesting. And when it comes to the vampires of the film, I like it a lot. I mean, it's an adaptation of a Stephen King book, so of course most of the writing is actually really nice and it is very entertaining. So, the first 2 hours of this film, because it used to be a mini series, but it was made into a 3-hour film. The first 2 hours, which I guess were the first two episodes of the film, I think are pretty good and very entertaining and well written. And then for the last third, they ditch most of the characters, or most of the characters die, and they kill most of the characters who are played by well liked actors. So they kill off characters who shouldn't have died, and then they have the actual threat of the film be not that much of a threat. Like, they set up for this big giant vampire to be the threat of the film, and to be a big threat to the town, and there's like this army of vampires, and the vampires themselves don't turn out to be that much of a threat. They're not that scary as they were set up in the first 2/3. And the way the film ends is kind of out of left field, where the two main characters are now Indiana Jones and trying to kill as much vampires as possible. So yeah, it's a very disappointing ending. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Even though the first 2/3 I think are pretty good, the last third just kind of falls apart. And next is Elvis. Now, I know some people love Elvis. I know even my parents who watched the film, they love Elvis. They think it's a great film. And when I watched it, there were some things I really liked about it. Like, the director, he's a good director. I mean, there's some great cinematography, great acting in this film. Some people hate Tom Hanks' performance in this film. I don't hate Tom Hanks' performance. I just think he was written to be a very mysterious guy where you don't know if he cares for Elvis, or if he doesn't care for Elvis, if he's there for the money, or he actually wants Elvis to succeed. It was written to be mysterious, so I think Tom Hanks did well enough. I just think the makeup was a little bit off, but otherwise I think Tom Hanks just got too much screen time for a very mysterious character. And, the Austin Butler does a very good job. I wouldn't be surprised if he wins Best Actor. So, overall, I enjoy the film, and, the last third of the film, the last act where they're at the hotel, I think is the best act, so it definitely ends on a high note. But otherwise, the film is always on montage mode, where I feel like it's like a 3 hour montage through Elvis's life. Like it goes in a fast pace, and it takes like 20 minutes to talk about one part of Elvis's life, and then 5 minutes to jump 10 years into the future. Like it's always like a montage, like a 3 hour montage. And that just makes for a very exhausting film. Like at the end of the film, I was exhausted. It was long. It was always on montage mode. It just goes by some events very fast and some events very slow. So the pacing of the film, I think, was pretty bad. And that kind of, puts the film down this low on the list. That being said, there are some great things about this film, and the music itself is actually pretty good. I had the desire to listen to some of Elvis's music, so the film itself is fine. The pacing is bad. It just rushes through a lot of the stuff, and I'm glad I watched it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Like, it's a flawed film, a very flawed film. It's like a montage. It's exhausting. I don't want to rewatch it, but I'm glad I watched it. I am glad I watched it in theaters. Like, it's just such an experience to have in the movie theater. And the director himself, he just brings so much style to his films. So, I'm glad I watched it. I don't want to rewatch it. That's the best way to describe this film. It's just a montage, a 3 hour montage. I'm glad I watched it. It's a great theater experience. Just not gonna rewatch it. And going from one film with Tom Hanks to another film with Tom Hanks is Greyhound. This is a film where it's basically about submarines in the middle of a battle, and actually it's a warship. Sorry. No, this isn't about submarines. This is more about warships, and the captain of the warship is Tom Hanks, and we're just following how this warship works and how they deal with submarines who are attacking them. And we see a lot of great battles. I will admit that some of the battles take place at nighttime, so it's kind of hard to see what's going on, and that's kind of the point, because some of the battles and the main conflict is that some of the warships can't see who the enemy is, and they're shooting each other by accident. So it's a little bit hard to follow along when it gets to the battle scenes. Otherwise, it's just like a great documentary of how warships work, and how it was like to be in the Navy in World War II or World War One or whatever war this takes place. I think World War II. And Tom Hanks again does a very good job as the captain, and overall it's a good experience to watch, and to see how warships work. And next up is Rocky 5. Now, I love the Rocky films, and I just started watching it these last 3 months. Like, I just started watching this franchise these last 3 months or 4 months, and I already loved these films. Like, there's not one bad film I've seen so far. I went all the way to Rocky 6, Rocky Balboa, and I haven't seen the Creed films yet, but there's not one bad Rocky film. All of them are watchable. I love that. I just love that. Like, there's not one bad Rocky film. All of them are rather great or very watchable, and this is a very watchable Rocky film. And the first 2/3 of this film is really good, like seeing how Rocky handles the financial situation, and how he becomes a mentor to this guy named Tommy, and you see him go back down to a poor person. Like, all that stuff was entertaining. And seeing him like try to be a manager to someone after missing Mickey and wanting to be in Mickey's shoes for someone else. Well, they do some interesting things with Rocky's character. But then, the film itself, it sets up this very good ending. Like, it sets up a very good tournament at the end, a very good fight scene. And then it's like the film only had 20 minutes left of screen time, and they had to end the film in 20 minutes. So they rush the ending, like literally rush it. Like, they don't do the normal tournament. There's no montage scene, like the classic montage scene, Rocky montages. There's nothing like that. I mean, it's a very rushed ending of them. And next up is Black Adam. Now, this has the same problem with Elvis, as there's a lot of, with Elvis, there's a lot of style and a lot of entertainment value and a lot of great things about it, but it's rushed, and it feels like too much, like you're exhausted by the end of it and you're glad you experienced it in the movie theater, but at the same time you don't want to rewatch it. That's the same thing with Black Adam. It's like full of action. It's non-stop action. It's an action-packed superhero film, and I just don't want to rewatch it. It's very exhausting at the end because it just doesn't take that many breaks between action scenes. There's just too much action, not enough story. And the villain in this film, I gotta be honest, the villain was kind of awful. Like, the actor does a fine job, but the villain, it just feels like the final boss in a video game movie. Like, if you were to have the final boss in a video game movie, and if this film was a video game, he would just be the final boss. Not very interesting, not a good movie villain. So, overall, it's a fine film, and it's a good experience to have in the theater with a packed theater. So, overall, it's fine, but once again, it's just too much. It exhausts me at the end. There's too much action. Next up is Big Daddy. This is like an Adam Sandler movie where he becomes a father and he's as bad as a father as you would expect. He basically just adopts a 6-year-old off the street, and it's a funny film. There were some scenes that made me laugh. Overall, it's not that memorable of a film. It has a good cast. Adam Sandler does a good job. Just think of it as an Adam Sandler movie. That's it. Like, the denominator of Adam Sandler movies. All of them are decent. All of them are kind of funny. They're not very funny on rewatch. They're just fine, funny Adam Sandler movies. And this is one of them. This is a nice Adam Sandler movie. It's a great way to pass the time. It's entertaining. So overall, Big Daddy is just a nice Adam Sandler movie with a lot of nice comedy. It's not as funny as I hoped it would be. I mean, it's not one of Adam Sandler's best films. But overall, it's just a decent Adam Sandler movie, a decent comedy movie, and a great way to pass the time. And next up is Bullet Train. Some people love this film, some people hate this film. I mean, there are some things I really liked about it. Like, there's some things I actually loved about it. The action scenes are great. The cinematography is great. Like, this film looks great. It looks spectacular. Like, the lighting, the cinematography, it's done very, very, very well. And I like it for that. It's a nice experience to have in the movie theater. And I just like all the actors being in this one film, like all these great actors being in one film and interacting with each other. That I find very fun. And, overall, it's a good film. It's just, it's not very funny. Like, it's supposed to be action comedy, and I didn't laugh that much in the film. Like, I was even in a packed theater while watching it. There were a lot of people in my theater, and I wasn't laughing at all. Like, there were some people who were laughing in the theater, but overall, the comedy, it just doesn't work for me. And also, just like Elvis, it's way too long. It did not need to be 3 hours. So even though it has a lot of great actors who would be very funny in a different film, and a lot of great directing, cinematography, action, it's a good time to have in the theater when you're watching it like in the big screen and seeing all these wonderful visuals. It's just not a great film. It's good, and it's not as good as it should have been. That's it, The Changeling. I know some people love this film. I know some people think this is one of the best horror movies of all time. And there are some creepy scenes, some scenes that got chills in my spine. Otherwise, it's not very entertaining. I just didn't find it very entertaining. I thought it was kind of boring. Again, it's very slow, but there's not that many things happening at once, so overall, just a very decent horror movie. There were some things I liked about it, and there was a very good cast in there. Just not a great film. Next up is Death on the Nile. I mean, I like that murder mysteries are on the renaissance recently. I was able to watch this film very early on, like before it came out into streaming or whatnot, or movie theaters. Like, in my movie theater, they were showing them early. That's all I remember about it. So overall, it's a fine film, and there is some good music in there. Like, it takes place in the 1940s or 50s, so I like the jazz music they play, and the mystery itself, I think, is actually very surprising. But overall, it's just not very entertaining of a film. Or I mean, it was kind of entertaining, but when it comes to the pacing, I feel like they just spend too long setting up all these characters and setting up this situation, and they spend too long going into the murder mystery of it all. and setting up all these characters kind of just to pad out the runtime instead of focusing on the main detective figuring out who did the murder. Next up is King Richard. Now, I don't really like tennis movies. I'm not interested in tennis movies or films about the sport of tennis or people trying to be famous tennis players. So overall, I didn't find the plot that interesting. The only reason I watched it was because Will Smith was in this, and for that, I think he did a very good job in this. His performance slaps harder than him at the Oscars. So overall, I think it's a fine film. Next up is Lightyear. Now, some people hate this film for some reason, and I get it. It's not that great a film. It's just a decent film, and I guess it'll be people will forget about it in 5 years or so. But for me, it's a very beautiful film, and the plot arc they give to Buzz Lightyear, the story arc they give him, I think is very interesting. And there's those first 10 minutes where he's in like a time travel loop, and he's trying to, beat time and save a civilization, and try to fix his mistake without appreciating what's already there. That I find pretty interesting. It's a very beautiful film, and there's something holding it back. I just don't think they really tie everything together at the end, and obviously they're setting up for some sequels that are probably never gonna come. So there's something about this film that kind of holds it back, kind of makes it a little bit forgettable, even though it looks very beautiful.